We have three speakers and then a comment from special invitee Nitish. First, we have Rohin. Rohin Garg is an independent researcher working on digital technologies and its implication in public policy. He has followed the developments in the agri-stack or India digital ecosystem for agriculture very closely. He has previously worked with Internet Freedom Foundation and would today open up the issues around the use of digital technology in agriculture. So the floor is yours, Rohin. Thanks.
Thank you, Apurva. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me. Today, I'll just try and address the second theme, but a certain part of the second theme, which is what has been what's the situation with regards to digital agriculture as it exists, and at the policy, mostly at the central level. Because I myself have come to this webinar, as I was telling the organizers, to learn more about what Israel's larger designs are with its investment into Indian agriculture. So a bit of a recap. Towards the end of 2020, when the farmers' movement was still going on, but it was also nearing its denouement, there were these rumors about something called the agri-stack, and people broadly had a very broad idea what it was, but there was a lack of specifics. Then I believe somewhere around March, a couple of us in civil society got to know that Microsoft had signed an MOU with the Ministry of Agriculture for a pilot project in digital agriculture. And initially, we had to file multiple RTIs before we were able to get a copy of that MOU, which told us that Microsoft was going to be conducting a pilot project which would involve handing over significant chunks of data of Indian farmers across 100 villages, if I remember correctly. And at least according to our reading, they could do whatever they wanted with that data, at least within the time frame of that MOU. After that, when civil society got heard about this, there was much more deliberation. There was much more pressure on the government, and they finally had to respond and say, okay, this is something we're doing. We're going to release a paper soon, which they did in May 2021, which was the IDEA paper, which is the India Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture, as Apurva mentioned. And that paper was mostly a technical paper, but we'll get to that. So there was a paper, a lot of civil society organizations and farmers organizations sent in their comments on it. There was some back and forth, but those comments were received and nothing's really happened. We still don't know what the final status of the paper is. The government does seem to want to put out a final paper, but we don't know when it's going to come. And so in the interim, the government has kept on holding its own conversations, mostly in partnership with the World Economic Forum and mostly with private sectors, about what the modalities of the rollout of the agri-stack project, as it were going to be. To that extent, my own work comes from being part of something called the Right Digitalization Group, which involves mostly formerly Internet Freedom Foundation, the IT for Change, Bharat Krishak Samaj, and Asha Kisan. And we've been trying to talk to the government about some of these issues. We'd held a multi-stakeholder conference in which we invited private sector and industry, and there the government did at least want to hear our concerns. Following which we've been able to have further dialogue with them. We were even able to present to them, and mostly what the government says is that they accept some of our concerns, but obviously they have their own idea of what they want the agri-stack to look like. And so while they appreciate our concerns, they aren't necessarily obviously going to implement everything we want. Of course, that dialogue is ongoing. And to come back to the IDEA paper, when it was released, I think the first thing anyone would look at is say that it's a very technical paper, and not even in the sense of any level of policy technicalities. It was basically a system design paper, which is I mean, essentially a pseudocode for the architecture. And one of the things that the government was harshly criticized for is that they seem to be putting forward this sort of paradigm of that the code is the law, that the government would put in this architecture and then the way the implementation of that architecture would itself be the policy of the government, which, as many of us pointed out, ignores the political economy that comes with anything to do with Indian agriculture. And so one of the main criticisms of the paper and of what the government's doing is the lack of grievance redressal. So within the agri stack, within the idea framework, there are not many places for farmers to genuinely provide feedback as to what's working, what's not, or to address, for example, if it's a digital crop insurance that they've gotten, there's no defined way to raise complaints. There's no defined responsibility. And we've seen with the PM Kisan scheme now, even at the pre-digital stage, there are issues. So when it goes to digital, these will probably only be exacerbated. And it's forget farmers control over data, right? So as we've seen in other countries, farmers' apprehension towards a lot of these digital agriculture projects are multiple. And on the data side, a lot of them are basically, for example, they don't have clarity over what the data licenses include, because these companies would come in, take all the data they can, without actually telling farmers what it's going to be used for. Often the data that they take is also shared with third parties to whom the farmers are not consented for data to be shared with. And generally farmers feel that, they're not getting the same amount of benefits. They're getting the companies that actually take their data get a disproportionate amount of benefits. And that essentially is where this entire struggle, let's be honest, lies. Because as now anyone would recognize, farmers' data is immensely valuable. Within the digital agriculture, as AI and machine learning technologies come to be used more and more, these data sets are the fodder that is to be fed to these algorithms to then provide whatever services the government wants or the private sector wants to give. And their valuation is incredible. So, for example, John Deere in the US now has stated that a lot of the new tractors that they sell, which have these intelligent systems, as it were, if you don't give control over all your data, say location or the performance of your tractor, or say how you've spread, say, your pesticide, or how you thresh the field, you will not, your tractor will be locked. It will not move. So just like how sometimes you can't open an app if you don't give permissions, there have been cases the same thing happening with tractors. Similarly, if you want to get repaired, if you're not giving enough data, or you're withholding something, or you're not consenting for John Deere to use your data in a certain way, to monetize it essentially, you can be denied repair work. And so there's this right to repair movement that's going on. But essentially, the point is that agricultural data is immensely valuable, and farmers are recognizing it. And that's the main bulwark. But at the same time, the government is, to a large extent, saying to the private sector that, okay, you come in, take what the data you want, and as long as you give some basic benefits to the farmers, it's all kosher. And I know personally, for example, I was called to negotiate for this Organic Farmers Association on their behalf with some carbon trading company from the EU. And they basically wanted to use certain digital tools such as satellite sensing, but also soil quality monitors to assess the capabilities for selling carbon credits and to sort of maintain their quality, as it were. And the company, not only was it getting all this data from the farm, it was firstly selling carbon credits for whatever 100, 200 euros per unit, and giving back maybe 500,000 rupees to the farmer per acre per year, which is nothing. Additionally, they were also monetizing the data that they were getting. So there was a double whammy to the farmers of getting a minuscule amount of the economic benefits that from the monetization of their data. So control over data is one of the key points. The other main issue for struggle is, of course, platforms. So as of now, the government envisages this sort of platform of platforms approach. Some of you who look at agricultural marketing may have noticed that the ENAM platform of the government is now a platform of platforms, which basically means that it's in a certain sense like the UPI model, but of course UPI plus plus, because UPI is a single variable, or rather more akin to the ONDC model, where the government would lay out this broad framework of APIs and rules to play within that system. Anyone can then just plug in, get their platform in, as long as it's compatible with the basic requirements, and then as they say, the market will have its way. But the issue, of course, is that this generally also doesn't work, in the sense that this also invariably leads to concentration of platforms. So actually, in our talks with the government, one of the concerns they really appreciated, and they even said it so, was that they don't want another Amazon or a Flipkart situation with agriculture in India. And to which our response was, the way you're going, that's what's going to happen. And even if as we've seen with UPI, right now, because of the cap on market share, you still, despite the cap on market share, rather, you have two platforms, that is GPay and then PhonePe, who control an outsized portion of the market. Between the two of them, I think they control about 90%, 45 and 35%. And that's with the cap on market share. Once that cap goes away, that will probably increase even further. For example, the Bheem app, which is the government app, which used to have around 40% of market share in 2017, it's now down to, I think, 1 or 2%. So that basically shows you what would happen if this model is followed. And that's before, for example, monetization. So just like with UPI, right now it's free, but if the MDR rate is raised, then those costs will be passed on to the consumer. A similar thing might probably happen in agriculture, where not only consumers, but farmers would then be forced to accept lower prices while being onboarded onto the platform, which has a dominant market share, and other sort of issues like that. And this really ties into what I think Ranjani had mentioned in her introduction about a decreasing public sector focus on agriculture. And as we've seen since, with many other things, since the 80s, or rather since the 90s, has been a declining share of public sector investment in agriculture, which has gone in hand with the rise in debt of farmers and with the decline in actual capital formation in agriculture, which is ultimately key to improving productivity. So the need for a public approach in the genuine sense to agri-stack is very important, because as we've seen in France, I believe in somewhere in the northeast of France, a government university was able to work with farmers to use AI to reduce pesticide usage by around 30-40%. And that's a sort of interventions that the government should look towards, because, for example, even at the time of the Green Revolution, you had a lot of these as you mean agricultural extension workers who went out in the field and helped farmers get onboarded onto the new high yield varieties and tractors and whatnot. Similarly, something similar should be done. It shouldn't be left to the vagaries of the private sector to go and tell the farmers that, because that will obviously be a very biased sort of advisory that will be given. And the other issue is that, to carrying on from the public sector approach, is that there's a general also issue of actually sustainability. So if you talk to most people in the sector, and the first step of AgriStack, the first likely step of AgriStack is going to be aggregators, just like you see in every other sector. And as I've spoken to with other people, most of these aggregators right now aren't profitable. But so how are they surviving? Basically, they have VC money. They'll survive for 5, 6, 7 years. They'll gather a lot of data. Then they'll just sell the data and they'll be fine. And that will be enough to make their return on the capital. That just goes to show you how profitable agriculture is, but also how the issue of sustainability of the business operation is not being solved by any of these companies. And that also means that when that VC funding dries up and any enterprise stays on, because of the lack of profits, those prices or those costs will inevitably pushed onto farmers, who will inevitably then will earn less compared to what they were earning in the pre-digital stage. And lastly, this is all of these issues should make the government and farmers themselves think about the need for some sort of data cooperatives in agriculture. We're seeing these pop up now slowly in, say, in the field of, say, transport of food, right? Public cooperative alternatives to these private sector apps. And ultimately, if the agri-stack is, or an agri-stack like project is to benefit farmers, something like that will something similar to that will have to emerge in the sector. I'll stop now.
Thank you, Rohin. I think for this conversation, and one of our aims here is really to raise issues of contemporary times and for us to think together. So in that sense, this was very valuable and a lot for us to think about. Moving from India to Palestine, we have Raya, since this is a conversation around collaborations, and we thought it's important to know the backstory rather from Palestine, where Israeli technology, which is kind of being promoted quite widely in Indian agriculture, and that is developed, and on what conditions it's developed. And for that, we have Raya Radwan, who's media and campaigns coordinator for the Palestinian grassroots Stop the Wall campaign, which mobilizes coalitions and unions defending rather resisting Israeli colonization in the occupied West Bank. Recently, I'm sure many of you would have heard of the struggle in Masafar Yatta, and Stop the Wall has been involved there, where Palestinians are resisting the largest expulsion by Israel since the 1970s, where 8 villages are said to be ethnically cleansed. And Stop the Wall is also a member of the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee. So over to you, Raya. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Apoorva, and thank you for this invitation. Actually, today I will highlight what apartheid Israel and its corporation are actually doing in the occupied Palestine. Israel is an apartheid regime that aims to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from their land. Apartheid Israel and its corporations who are illegally expand on the Palestinian land, stealing resources, export walls of climate colonialism. Israeli companies are expanding across the globe in order to greenwash Israeli crimes and worsen in many places policies of resource theft. Israel controls about 87% of Palestinian water resources and prevent Palestinians from accessing them, violating one of our fundamental rights. The water is being confiscated by apartheid Israel and then sold at a high price to us, while the water springs are located in the Palestinian stolen land. Apartheid Israel has actively prevented the construction and the maintenance of water systems and networks in the occupied land through the systematic denial of permits for any construction or rehabilitation of water resources and water infrastructure. The permits are virtually impossible to obtain. Water theft policy and greenwashing policy are used to expel Palestinians from their lands, while Israel destroys the Palestinian agriculture and livelihood of farmers, practices apartheid and colonizes Palestinian land through its agribusiness. It also sells itself and its agribusiness industry in the global south as providing solutions for sustainable agriculture. And here comes the interconnection between us and the Indian struggles. Actually, the Israeli occupation uses the Jewish National Fund, the JNF, to greenwash its criminal acts against Palestinian people. JNF is aiding Israel in its theft of our land resources, promoting its apartheid strategic plans by raising money to support the construction and expansion of settlements. Why Palestinians are prevented from constructing any homes, any schools, especially in Area C. Israeli occupation within JNF are denying Palestinians from their rights. Since its establishment in 1948, the Israeli apartheid regime expelled the majority of the Palestinian people from their lands. Crucial assaults and war crimes had forced Palestinians out of their homes. The demolition of houses, infrastructures formed an essential part to guarantee the denial of refugee right to return. The GNF then planted trees and entire forests on the remnants of their homes, I mean Palestinian homes. The GNF is proud, and Israel are proud of their greenwashing and how they plant trees and make it homes for animals and birds, while they are denying and expelling Palestinians from their lands. Israeli ethnic cleansing of Palestinian continues. As Apoorva just mentioned, 8 Palestinian villages in Masafer Yatta and 36 unrecognized villages in An-Naqab are facing an imminent destruction. The 36 unrecognized villages in the Naqab by the Israeli colonial authorities, roughly 100,000 Palestinians holding a third-class Israeli citizenship live in these villages. By unrecognizing them, Israel denies Palestinians who live there the basic service like health centers, schools, water, electricity, and sewage infrastructure. Israel also denies the residents of these villages construction permits, where their homes are constantly demolished or under the threat of being demolished at any moment. The GNF is still a key tool in this effort. It runs an ethnic cleansing campaign by the so-called Blueprint Nagav. Through this project, which is falsely promotes an image of the Nagav as an empty place and barren land. The real aim of this project is to replace Palestinian owners of the land in the Naqab with 500,000 new Jewish settlers and the GNF trees. Masafer Yatta in the South Hebron Hills is a home of 1,300 Palestinian peoples, which have been living and herding their livestock in the area since generations. Now Israel wants to demolish these all 8 villages. Khalat al-Dabi' is one of these villages who had received the last decision to be demolished. Actually, what's going on in Masafer Yatta, because the apartheid Israel has classified this land as a firing zone for its occupation forces. These people and these 1,300 residents are struggling against ethnic cleansing policies for more than 40 years. As the Indian farmers are struggling against the Israeli agribusiness, Palestinians are steadfast in their land, facing the Israeli apartheid regime, as they believe that their presence on the land is the only way to defend their right to exist. They are struggling to live on their ancestral land against all systematic ethnic cleansing policies. Here comes the interconnection between us and the Indian struggle. Netafim, who is aiding Israel in its illegal existence and expansion over the Palestinian land, and who is also invading Indian agriculture, must be stopped and must be faced. The ones with dirty hands would never develop agriculture in India. Here is the struggle, and this is why we need to uncover Israeli greenwashing policies and to stop apartheid Israel from exporting climate colonialism. Thank you.
Thanks, Raya, for that connection. And in the chat, you can see the report that BDS India had done on Netafim that kind of lays out what Raya has spoken about how Israeli ethnic cleansing and colonialism operates through companies like Netafim, how they're agents of those, and what they then bring to Indian farmers. And in that sense, what harms Palestinians also harms Indians. And that's the kind of idea with which we've been building this struggle. So thanks a lot for that input, Raya. Now we'll invite Afsar for his intervention for a global perspective on digitalization, as well as on the recent GRAIN report, which many of you would find useful. Afsar is associated with GRAIN, an international nonprofit that works to support struggles for community-controlled and biodiversity-based food systems. He has been working for more than 20 years on agriculture and food policy with various civil society organizations in India, and I'll be sharing a PPT while he speaks. Thank you.
Thank you, Apurva. Thank you very much. And thanks to Focus and BDF India for giving me this opportunity to speak at this forum, at this webinar. In fact, as Apurva has already introduced me, I'm Afsar Jafri and I work with GRAIN, and I'm based in New Delhi. And what Apurva has just mentioned about the, about the report which GRAIN, my organization, has brought out. And it's the title of this report, it Farms, Arms and Israel's Agro-Diplomacy. And I am just sharing the, address, the link of this report here on the chat. So those who are interested can look at it. So, and in fact, this report basically exposes the overseas activities of some of the main Israeli agribusiness companies and their use of digital technologies in agriculture, which is impacting the people in the global south and in Palestine. And it also shows how a handful of little-known Israeli companies, often led by former defense and secret service officers with high-level political connections.
Afsar, just a minute. Apurva, the screen has gone.
Yeah, but I thought he's talking about the GRAIN report. Afsar, do you want the screen?
Yeah, you can load it later when I finish.
Yeah.
So it's basically, most of these companies are run by the former defense and secret service officers, and they have very high political connections. And they are the main actors in Israeli foreign agro-diplomacy. For example, if you look at the irrigation company Netafim platform NetBeat, it was developed through a collaboration with a subsidiary of the Israeli state-owned military corporation called Rafael Advanced Defense System. And Netafim also partners with Alta, which is an innovation and C3, the two Israeli companies founded by naval veterans and former military intelligence officers that are developing agricultural applications from Israeli military technologies like drones and sensors. Netafim is one of such Israeli company which has been singled out by human rights organization for directly profiting from Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian lands. And according to a report by Who Profits, Netafim drip irrigation technology, for example, was critical to establishing Israeli agriculture settlement in the West Bank and in the Syrian Golan areas that Israel illegally seized in 1967. And this comes at the expense of access to water for Palestinians. So this is the report. If you want to go into details of this report, you can access it on the GRAIN website. Now, coming to the presentation on digitalization of agriculture. In fact, this comes from the World Economic Forum. They call it the fourth industrial revolution, or industry 4.0. And one of the important features of this age is the rapid expansion of digitalization in every spheres of life. During the pandemic, we have all witnessed how digitalization became a part and parcel of our daily affairs, whether we live in rural or in urban areas. There is so much penetration of digital technology in social and political economic situation of our society that many people call this as digital colonizing. In food and agriculture sector, the industry 4.0 is transformed as agriculture 4.0. And interchangeably, it is also called as smart farming or digital agriculture. In this agriculture system, the whole food supply is getting increasingly digitalized or turned into digital information using data-related technologies such as precision agriculture, automatic sensor tracking devices, Internet of Things, mobile and cloud technologies, artificial intelligence, or blockchain. And in grain, we see this as a continuation and deepening of the industrialization of agriculture system. Digitalization has become a new tool in the further concentration and control of agriculture sector by the corporate powers, which is resulting in unprecedented marginalization and displacement of small and marginal farmers around the world. And if you look at the OECD Food and Agriculture Fisheries Report 122, which is published in 2019, it says, it basically says that agriculture sector is both an important consumer and supplier of data. Farm data are particularly important to facilitate global value chain integration. And as per this report, farmers and farming are the new market. They are not only consumers, but they are also suppliers of the data, which feed the big tech companies. But this report also raises a concern that essential information like soil condition, climate, and water quality that should be publicly accessible to farmers as it is necessary for agriculture production can easily be extracted, stored, privatized, monopolized by a handful of agribusiness and digital companies. So in nutshell, it basically presents what's going to happen in the agriculture sector very soon. Now, next slide, please.
We're on the next one, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so this is in fact no longer a threat. It is actually happening, and in this presentation, I would try to unpack this phenomena and how the digitalization is being used to monopolize agriculture system in the developing world, where farmers and farming are already in deep distress. Today, we are witnessing a fast acceleration of digitalization in food and agriculture sector. The implementation of digital technologies in agriculture, such as artificial intelligence, drones, and e-commerce are growing at lightning speed. Digital technologies are now being used along the entire supply chain of agriculture products. Agribusiness corporations are teaming up with digital technology companies or creating their own digital arms to create products and services targeting the food supply chain. Today, there is unprecedented level of investment as well in the digital information platforms connected to their cloud services from the digital and information and communication technology companies that traditionally have not worked in agriculture sector. So you look at whether it's Microsoft or Apple or Google or Facebook, they have no history of working on agriculture sector. But now with the digital agriculture, they are very much into food and farming. And grain research shows that in 2020, investment in agri-tech has been more than tripled to $31 billion US dollar from $9 billion US dollar in 2016. So this is the kind of expansion we are seeing in this sector. As vertical and horizontal integration happen along the food supply chain, corporations see the potential of gathering agriculture data enabled by digital technologies to monopolize the supply chain and maximize their profit. By using drones or artificial intelligence sensory devices, these global technology companies known as big tech, normally all these, what the 4 big tech are, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Facebook, are able to harvest real-time farmers' data and analyze the conditions of their soils and water, the growth of their crops, the situation with pests and diseases, and the looming weather and climate changes. And for example, Microsoft have developed a digital platform, a farming platform called Azura Farm Beats that operates through the company massive global cloud technologies called Azure. The platform is being designed to provide farmers with real-time data and analysis on condition of their soils and water, the growth of their crops, the situation with pests and diseases, and the looming weather and climate changes they may face. The value of this information and advice depends on the volume and quality of data that Microsoft can harvest and analyze with the algorithm. This is why Microsoft has partnered with leading companies developing farm drones and sensory devices, as well as with those companies developing technologies that can receive and act upon the information transmitted from farm beats, the high-tech tractors, pesticide spraying drones, and other machines hooked up to the Azure cloud. Next slide, please. In September 2020, as my previous speaker have already indicated, Microsoft and this is about Africa. The AGRA, there is a platform called Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, which is basically Melinda Gates Foundation. They run this program in Africa. They have formalized a partnership to help Microsoft expand its Azure Farm Beats platform across Africa and deepen their joint efforts to deploy Microsoft chatbot. It's called, the app is called Huza Bot. This app provides small farmers with advice via WhatsApp and SMS, including information on what inputs to use and which companies to buy from. And my colleague has already spoken about the Microsoft MOU they have signed in April 2020 with the Union Government of India, especially the Agriculture Ministry, to set up AgriStack. And through the AgriStack, Microsoft could possibly get access to a database of 50 million farmers. And this can go, many more data can also be added, because now the Indian government is trying to link this program with several other agriculture-related programs in India. So data collected through these programs could include personal details, family, bank details, profile of land held, how much, the measures, the fertility, production details, which includes sowing details, crop quality, financial details, loans, credit rates. And we all fear that the huge amount of data that this project is going to collect can lead to massive exploitation of farmers using their own data against them, along with erosion of their privacy. Next slide, please. Now, the big tech teams up with giant agribusiness companies like Bayer, Corteva, Syngenta Group, and ChemChina, because ChemChina and Syngenta has a joint venture, BASF, to provide advice to farmers on seeds, pesticide, and fertilizer. The last few years have seen an explosion of mobile apps developed by these pesticide and fertilizer companies to offer to farmers to help them decide what crops to plant, how much pesticide to spray, how much fertilizer to use, and when to harvest, among other things. And it is basically providing extension service to these farmers. And this is an invisible extension service. In Indian agriculture system, we have seen every agriculture department in the state used to have an extension service to provide this kind of services to the farmers. Now that is completely disappeared. It's already defunct, we have seen. But now it is being replaced by this kind of invisible extension service through apps. Almost all prominent agribusiness players have collaborated with global technology companies to create apps that now cover millions of hectares of farms. In return for the advice offered by these apps, farmers supply agribusinesses with a steady flow of data on soil and weather conditions, the prevalence of pest, crop yields. In reality, the farmers become their customers and get dependent on their advice, replacing the public agriculture extension services. For example, if you look at the Bayer Field View digital farming platform, it extracts 87.5 billion data points from 180 million acres of farmland in 23 countries and funnel it into the cloud servers of Microsoft and Amazon. And if you want to know more details about it, you can access the very excellent report recently published by ETC group called Food Barons, and you can find it on the ETC website. Now BSF has its Xarvio app, which identify next slide, please. BSF has this app called Xarvio, which identify weeds, diseases, insects, etc. in farmer field and predicts when they would become a problem. To run this app, Bayer and BASF uses cloud computing platform of Amazon Web Services, one of the big tech companies that control the world's cloud services, and it is ahead of Microsoft, Google, and Alibaba. In 2020, 4 major platforms, which are Alibaba, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft alone, accounted for 67% of revenue accruing from global cloud infrastructure services. And this is from UNCTAD to 2021 report. Next slide, please. So similarly, if you look at Yara, which is one of the largest fertilizer company in the world, they offers a whole set of digital tools to assess farmers' fertilizer needs, such as Yararix. This is a tool for precision farming that allows farmers to measure crop nitrogen requirements using their smartphones. There is another tool by Yara itself, which is called @Farm, and it allows farmers to analyze their field with satellite images and selectively apply fertilizer. Many leading food and beverage processors already control the digital data for raw material sourcing, processing, marketing, and delivery. Similarly, Amazon's, one of the big delivery corporation, they use its big data to track consumers' shopping habits and preferences. And John Deere, the world's largest farm machinery company, now employs more software engineers than mechanical engineers. And it is not only limited to inputting and equipment companies. Microsoft and Amazon have entered the GSaaS, which is a global station as a service market, enabling satellite operators to communicate and control their satellites and process the data with their AI service. In October 2020, Microsoft partnered with Elon Musk SpaceX to connect its Azure cloud computing network to Starlink satellite internet services. The big data is now relevant to all areas of industrial agriculture and information requirement. It connects inputs, seeds, fertilizer, and chemicals to farm equipment and food and beverages processors and retailers to consumers in an unprecedented way. And in the process, the data has become a major driver of consolidation and concentration of their hold in the food sector. This integration are getting more and more strengthened through corporate partnership, mergers and takeovers, creating the possibility for a much more profound and complete control capture of food system. Next slide, please. Now, the most important question comes, which my previous speaker has also touched upon, is who owns or controls the agriculture data? generated through digitalization by big tech and agribusiness corporations. And he has already spoken about the India, MOU with big tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Cisco and Geo, and some of these Indian companies. The question was raised on this issue, on the question of data, and the letter was written to the by the ASHA network, which he also mentioned about. It's the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture and Holistic Agriculture, to the Prime Minister, and they said that this new development is taking place in a policy vacuum, because so far India doesn't have a policy on the ownership of data. It is still information, and till today, as I said, India doesn't have a law regarding control and ownership of digital ag data. It is therefore very important to know where this data is getting stored, who owns it, who has control of it. And in December 2018, in fact, if you look at the Reliance, Mukesh Ambani, the head of Reliance, he demanded that Indian government prevent corporates, especially global corporations, from owning Indian data. He said data colonization is as bad as the previous form of colonization. Data freedom is as precious as the freedom we won in 1947. So this is the kind of importance he is giving to the data, But few months later, we found that Reliance sold almost 10% of digital business to Facebook, probably compromising the huge database of Indian consumers, especially all those consumers who have taken the Reliance Jio or are consumers of JioMart. And we don't know whether this data is stored in USA or in India. It is therefore not surprising that corporations involved in digital agriculture approach this issue of data privacy as a profit-making possibility. For example, when farmers buy equipment like tractors from John Deere, and in fact, my previous speaker has already touched upon this, they must sign up for a certain condition with respect to the data that John Deere will gather from the tractor. Because these tractors are not mere machines. They are digital tools to transfer data from the fields where they are being used to the parent companies. Farmers sign up a license to operate the vehicles, but they are not the owner of the equipment. They are not the owner of the tractor, the software embedded in it, or the data generated by the equipment. In addition, farmers are sometimes forbidden from repairing their tractors, and he has already mentioned about this whole campaign going on in the US. Companies like John Deere.
Can you just finish in like 2 minutes so that we also have time for the question answer?
You can go to the next slide, please. This is the last slide. So this type of conditions are also evident in the partnership between the big agrochemical and seed companies and farm equipment manufacturers. These collaborations involve the sale of an exchange of data, which are analyzed to deliver prescription to farmers, for example, which seeds to plant on, what plot of the land, or the application rates of other inputs. The company that controls farm data is positioned to use its farm management platform to link the farmer to preferred products, whether it's by the same company or by its partner companies supplying agriculture products. Therefore, we are confident that the big tech attempts to take over agriculture will not go unchallenged. And there are attempts being made by, whether it's in India, in other parts of the world, where they are challenging the big tech attempts to take over this food system through digital agriculture. And we have also witnessed in India that, when in 2021, India witnessed a massive mobilization of farmers across the country and the capital city of Delhi. And where they have it was one of the largest and longest protests in the modern India, and these farmers have opposed not only the 3 legislation brought out by the government, which are believed to be to benefit the Indian agricultural business, but they have also opposed the increasing monopoly by this big tech and agribusiness over the food and agriculture. And in fact, if you look at some of the development which are happening, in fact, some of the Indian farmers or FPOs, they have also developing their own apps, I met some of the farmer at the, there was a meeting in Mysore recently where farmers are developing their own apps to for different purposes, whether it's for sale of their products, agriculture produce, or for dealing with this, whether it's a climate situation, or it's, they want to deal with this whole problems they face with the pest on the fertilizer issues and all that. So there are attempts being made by the farmers groups in India to develop their own apps. And this is how they are going to deal with this whole control of agriculture by these big corporations, by having their own tools, their own apps to deal with, to solve the problem of agriculture they face in India. So I would like to conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Afsar, for that global perspective on the issue, as well as opening up with Grain's report on farms, arms, and agro diplomacy. I think it fits very well with the way Israel has been intervening in India, but also the role agribusiness has been shaping globally. Before inviting Nitish, who we have for a comment, I just want to quickly add that Afsar has been talking about big tech in agriculture, and we have an ongoing campaign against Google and Amazon's cloud service for Israel's military, which is bringing together tech workers as well as digital rights activists. And I'm not at all surprised that they are also now entering or have entered the sector of agriculture, and maybe it calls for even more connections between struggles of Palestinians as well as human rights defenders, farmers everywhere. Now, we have a very special guest, Nitish, for a comment on the presentation and to open up the discussion. Nitish is a research associate with the P. Sundaraya Memorial Trust of All India Kisan Sabha. And yeah, Nitish, could you turn on your camera? Yeah, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
you can hear me, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, let me begin with extending solidarity of All India Kisan Sabha to the great fighters in Palestine, who are heroically resisting neocolonial forces in their land. So I extend all solidarity to the Palestinian comrades present here. It was indeed a very serious discussion. All of the three panelists have delved into major technical developments that's happening in the digital agriculture. So I'm not going to the technical details, but as representing the largest peasant organization in India, I just want to contextualize what is a larger political economic context where this kind of corporate concentration is happening in digital agriculture from the perspective of All India Kisan Sabha. So first of all, what we understand is that when we critically delve into the contemporary agrarian condition in India, and which is also equally true to most of the global South, there is an increasing qualitative interpretation of international finance capital and domestic monopoly capital, especially certain sections of the domestic monopoly capital. So in Indian case, the sections of the domestic monopoly capital like Adani and Ambani are leading in this political economic process. And so these sections were very passionate to implement draconian anti-farmer laws. So the main political economic character of this trajectory is that of the international finance capital integrating the domestic monopoly capital with it and resorting to aggravated accumulation of capital, dissolving all the means of public sector industries and public sector banks and finance institutions into the vortex of above said process of international finance capital, monopoly capital combined, integrating the domestic economy with the international systemic current under the international finance capital. So the point is to critically understand the increasing hegemony of international finance capital, which is cueing the petty producers in agriculture all over the world. So for this combination of international finance capital and monopoly capital, digital agriculture is becoming another tool for their accumulation. So this is the larger political context which we should critically understand. Secondly, I think as some of the researchers in some other works have pointed out, now it seems like there is a kind of institutional nexus which is emerging, which is often called as philanthropy finance development complex. I repeat, philanthropy finance development complex, where there are a lot of private foundations, foreign aid, states, rating agencies, think tanks, business intelligence, financial institutions. All these kind of institutions club together and in the name of philanthropy, which is increasingly subjugated to the interest of the finance capital, operates in agriculture. So, this process of financialization is turning into philanthrocapitalism. So we can see there are a lot of capitalist philanthropic agencies which are seriously interested in digital agriculture. So this is the political economic, I believe this is the political economic context and process that we should critically understand to understand the increasing concentration of corporates in digital agriculture. Secondly, one of the presenters pointed out that we cannot have a complete no to digital technologies in agriculture. I think that's a correct position, because to make the livelihood of the farmers, we can actually use digital technologies. But then, the question is about who controls this. So one possible option is to make public sector investments in digital technology more. We should take public sector investments very seriously, as well as we can also think of forming digital cooperatives, where digital cooperatives can actually help farmers in nourishing agricultural activities. But what we are seeing is a very dangerous level of corporate concentration in agriculture, and this will definitely lead to already skewed petty producers in agriculture, and which will eventually intensify the ongoing primitive accumulation in agriculture. So I once again extend my solidarity to all the struggling comrades, I think we can open the session for discussion.
Thanks a lot, Nitish, for your comment and overview from the perspective of Kisan Sabha and from the perspective of really building struggles along these questions that have been raised today. We have a few questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read them out and then I will invite the speakers to respond to them as well as for their closing comments. We have a question about, as a farmer, do I have the right to say to the government of India not to share any data related to me, to be shared without my permission? And the same person also is asking about the best option is to have, is go local, and we can plan this out with the help of digital tech. Sandesh is asking, as one of the speaker mentioned, privatization in agriculture is increasing, whereas public sector investment is decreasing. But there are also certain benefits of the privatization, such as quick services as compared to government services. So how do you suggest we could achieve a healthy balance? And finally, there are two more questions rather, so let me just quickly read them out. This person's question to all the panelists is that critiquing the ongoing digitalization, it is unsurprising and inadvertent that the critiques of digitalization in general on data colonialism, for instance, get intertwined. Do you think, however, and to that extent possible, these issues need categorization or differentiation so that while critiquing digitalization of agriculture, more focus can be put on everyday digital activities in agriculture? Will this be a helpful exercise to carry out? Also, do we know what is happening at farmers' level in more concrete terms? How do we know farmers in India are becoming more aware about stealing of their digital data? And finally, which areas can farmer organizations or friendly governments focus on first to increase public sector capacity for digitalization of farmers' welfare? So I'm going to invite our speakers in the same order to respond to these questions and for any closing comments. So Rohin first.
Yeah, I think I can attempt to answer some of these questions. So for the first one, for example, right now, given that there's no personal data protection law and the non-personal data committee, the recommendations haven't finally been accepted. The third, I think, report is still in the air. So right now, there's not much of a legal basis to actually say much. That may change within the next year or so, hopefully. I think the new draft, the personal data protection bill, just came out today. But as of now, I don't think there's much ground. On the private sector versus public, that's something I want to touch upon right now. It's the private sector, the quick services that are mentioned. I will only ask so that the person who asked that actually go and take a look at, for example, RBI statistics. And that with the increasing creeping of the private sector in agriculture, you have had farmers' debt rise and incomes reduce in real terms, actually probably even in nominal terms to some extent. The services they provide, they are not necessarily often commensurate, say, with the cost at which they achieve. For example, this year, the pesticide crisis we saw, there was active hoarding by these private players, I think somewhere in April or May. But that does not mean the private sector doesn't have any role to play. So, for example, when you look at, for example, at least when we have been, the Right Digitalization Group has been talking to the government, no one is saying no to the private sector in agriculture, but if it wants to enter, it must play by certain rules. And those rules must ensure that the benefits of any data they process actually goes to the farmers. Right. So, for example, if you have one platform, as opposed to say Amazon having its own platform, which it already does, by the way, or say Microsoft or ITC having its own platform, you have one platform. You can, if you want to sell your agri services or digital agriculture products or credit or whatever, you can do it through that. But they will have to follow certain rules that the government lays down. Data, you cannot store the data. For example, the government can, or there may be sort of a data trust that say controls the data. A private company can come in, let its algorithm run the data, and then take back the insights without ever looking at the original data. So there are many ways to actually ensure that you have government and private sector in there without letting private sector sort of become dominant. But that's not necessarily what the government is going towards right now. And lastly, just to answer the question about where the focus should be to increase public sector capacity, I think it's firstly, and this also touches on another question, it's firstly making farmers aware about the economic benefits of the data. So again, sorry to repeat this so often, but the Right Digitalization Forum is actually next week holding a conference with several farmers unions to get them aware about what's happening and what sort of data rights they should have or what they want, and indeed what they want from digital agriculture, because there are already many public and NGO-led pilot projects in digital agriculture. So farmers have a taste of what it is, but it's unclear whether they actually know concretely what they want from digital agriculture. So it would be firstly to ensure that farmers are made aware of what's happening and how they can benefit, and then to ask them, okay, here's what these things can do. What do you want? I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot, Rohan. Raya, can we have you on for any responses or closing comments?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just want to thank everyone for this impressive conversation. I really feel that everything that was said was really informative. And I just need to say that by standing together and by understand the interconnection of our struggles, we can struggle together against privatization of the agricultural sector, the land and the natural resources. Standing together against all capitalist policies and the neoliberal decisions and investors, against all types of colonialism and exploitation, in terms of privatization and corporations in India or in all over the global south, and also in Palestine, the ruling classes tremble at communist revolution. I just want to say that, all solidarity from the heart of the occupied land to all farmers and peasants in India. And thanks a lot for this conversation.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Raya. Afsar?
Yeah, I think Rohan has already answered most of the questions. I would only like to add basically to what Selvam has said about whether data related to me be shared to anyone without my permission. In fact, your data is but whose data will be shared? That is a very important question. If you have accessed any of the government service, then only your data will be there. I mean, if a farmer who is not part of any of the government program, or they are not downloaded any app to use a particular digital service provided by a corporation, those data are being compromised. Those data are being shared with the corporation. If you are, for example, there is another question which says, if I'm doing, in organic farming, the decisions are made by farmers themselves according to his or her own local situation. In such a case, how digitalization will impact the decision making? In organic farming, if you are doing organic farming and you are using all your, local resources and not accessing any services by, the corporations or agribusinesses, then your data are not being compromised. So you don't have to be bothered about, this kind of things. Only those data are compromised, which if you are using any government services, those people who are part of different government programs, their data, and that's why I mentioned 50 million data, farmers' data are being shared with Microsoft. which is a hoot, because they have all the government programs are being, or data are being given to Microsoft for this, MOU. So that is very important to know. Now, regarding the private versus public, in fact, we are already using private services. I mean, in agriculture, privatization happening for a long time. Most of the hybrid seeds are by the private companies. The pesticides are being, sold by the private companies. So the privatization is happening. The question is how much control these private companies have over our agriculture. That's the very important thing. I mean, privatization is happening. I need to keep on happening. But only thing is, the government, the kind of power the government is providing to these big corporations through, this kind of MOU, that is the very questionable thing.
Thank you, Afsar, and to all the speakers for their responses and
I would request if you can also ask Nidesh to, because he is from a pharma organization, and to
Sure.
to all his comments on these questions.
Sure. Nitish?
Yeah, comments. I'm generally in agreement with the kind of explanations given by your panelists. One thing which I want to answer very honestly is that we should really work on politically educating educating peasantry about the larger dangers of the commodification of the data. So different farmers organizations should take this issue very seriously, study it, and politically educate the basic producing classes which are with peasant organizations. And one thing, I was also talking to Comrade Rohin, we actually should seriously think of possibilities of forming digital cooperatives where progressive sections from the IT industry and other related industries can come together and establish a cooperative and maybe in a consortium of cooperatives, digital cooperatives, and help peasantry to fight this corporate takeover. So I think more work should be made on this, and Kisan Sabha is definitely seriously taking up this issue. We will have more internal deliberations on corporate takeover of digital agriculture. That's it.
Thanks, Comrade Nitish. I think we are sticking quite close to our time. So now I would just invite Ranjini for some information for logistics and for closing this discussion.
Yeah, thank you everyone, actually, firstly, for coming together for this webinar. But I think more questions have come up through this discussion. I just want to briefly also point out that although the government has been saying so much about both on grounds of digitalization and even on alternative farming, but if you see the budget documents of the Indian government, it's hardly any money allocated to these. So a lot of it is like making more noise than, because one of the questions that also came up was how much of it is actually like happening on ground. So most of it, I feel that as of now, although that also is very important for us to understand and increase our understanding about these policy structures that are coming up and how the technologies are creeping in. But I feel that this discussion also has to like center around what is actually happening on the ground. So I think that opens up more discussions for like further discussions amongst us. And also I just want to mention to all the participants and the attendees that we'll be bringing out a report from this webinar, and also post the recording of this video on our channels, on our social media, and you will be communicated of all the outputs that come out of this discussion. I would also like to say that this was the first of the webinars that was conceptualized in a series, in a dialogue series that we and Focus and BDS India was conceptualizing. So hopefully we can take these conversations ahead and talk about more of the intersectionalities of corporate capture, of Israel's role on agriculture, Indian agriculture, as well as agriculture in the global south per se. And lastly, I kind of did not mention this, but I think one of the things that also we have to figure out is this, the presence of Israel ag tech in India also comes with the general political climate that we are witnessing. So all of this is also not completely detached from what is happening in terms of geopolitics and world politics. So thank you so much, and thanks for the interpreters who have been here and who have been helping us to all through this time, the webinar. So thank you so much. And with this, we can close the meeting today and hope to see you all for the rest of the webinars whenever we come up with them. Yeah. So thank you again.